So there are two questions before us. I will see if I can understand both, but I'll read the original question out, and it goes like this. It says, I am curious what ego is from a spiritual standpoint. I'm going to break this question down, or this answer down, according to the question. The ego has no spiritual standpoint because ego, in whatever tradition you have, whether it's Freud or whether it is Patanjali, all refers to the same thing. Ego, the term coined by Freud, simply means I, and the Sanskrit for it is aham, and it is a psychological term. I should explain. The whole psychology that is behind the practice of yoga, adopted by all the Vedanta systems, will be to understand the mind as a kind of field. We call this field chitta. Now, if you want a full explanation, I recommend that you look at the Raja Yoga and see Swami Vivekananda's comprehensive commentary on the geography of the mind. And let's replace the term mind with the term antakarana, which is an internal instrument. The external instrument is the body. The internal instrument is the mind. When the internal instrument sees things without the body, there's a term that we have come to coin, and it's called astral traveling. Nothing travels anywhere. It's simply that the sensations normally received by the sense organs is bypassed and cognition comes in first. Now the indriyas, the sense organs, are also part of this chitta, this instrument. This instrument operating in the field that is called chitta has a number of different component parts. That is why we know it is not our authentic fundamental self, because anything that has parts has to be assembled. It's an aggregate, and that aggregate will also disperse into parts. It means it's perishable. So when we analyze this true, what is our true ego, that is what is our true aham, our true self, we come to this term in Sanskrit, Atman is our true self. But the term Atman just means self, and we can apply it to what is assumed to be our self also. For this reason, many schools of Buddhism, it's attributed to Buddha himself, will say that there is no ego. Ego is as temporary, there is no Atman. Atman meaning ego, because there is no reality in the mental field. So we know that the indriyas, the real sense organs, are internal. They're part of an internal setup, instrumentation, where we understand things, where a certain cognition takes place, a certain choice is given, a certain reaction is formed, and our experience is stored so that some of our reactions are unconscious reactions. Where does the ego come into this? It is a component part. And don't take my word for it. This comes in terms of something like a definition. According to the classical dictionary definition, the self, the ego is the self, especially as contrasted with another self or the world. The one of the three divisions of the psyche in the psychoanalytic theory that serves as the organized conscious mediator between the person and reality, especially by functioning both in the perception of and adaptation to reality. In other words, the ego is that conscious sense of self. But it is a component of the mind and not really our authentic self. The term ego is the Latin word for I, that's our ego actually, if you want the schoolboy pronunciation. So ego, I. So if a person seems to begin every sentence with this I, it's sometimes a sign of a big I or a big ego. And it was, of course, the psychologist Sigmund Freud, or actually his original translator, who put ego or ego into the popular vocabulary. But what he meant by the word is very complex. So only other psychologists really use it in this Freudian sense. Now we use it in a Jungian sense. We introduce it into the Enneagram. The Enneagram is all about identification of a non-standard ego that is individual and personalized to you. And then how do we deal with it? So generally, most people use this term ego or ego simply to mean one sense of self-worth. You can also say self-image, whether it's an exaggeration or not. And Patanjali gives the very best definition of it, which we'll come to. So I think we all understand what the term means. But what it doesn't say is, it doesn't tell us any function compatible with the question. So the question goes, I'm curious what ego is from a spiritual standpoint. From a spiritual standpoint, it has nothing to do, it has no connection really, other than a reflected one, of the authentic self. And the authentic self is the quest in spiritual life. So our ego, the questioner says, is a self-defense strategy in every life. Well, no, it's not. The formation of our behavior that is associated with our identity serves as a defense strategy. That's all. But it's not the purpose of the ego to operate in a defensive mode. And it protects us from people who want to abuse our kindness and generosity. No, it doesn't. In fact, it flies in the face of it. The original childhood understanding of our personality development, we have to distinguish between ego and persona. Persona is a much broader term, but the ego component, that is the necessary conscious part of our individual identification. From there, it's kind of, we build a story around it. So it's really the personality that acts as a defensive mechanism with a defensive strategy. They care for construction of this mask. Now you could say that this mask also really is this ego, but I would say that ego is the essential individualized identity that operates as a personality and constructs a mask. So this is seen, the question is posed as if the ego is something that is useful, but it is not. In fact, it is extremely damaging. Sorry, I should point out, as a component part, it's simply a part. And is necessary in terms of asserting our sense of individuality that is useful. I'll have to explain that a little bit. And so I am curious what ego is from spiritual stance. Okay, we have to then go to scripture to understand anything to do with spirituality. Now, how is it that the ego has some use, having said all of this? You see, egoism is an obstacle. And it is shortened sometimes to aham, the sense of I. It is the sense of I that is an obstacle. But a ripe ego, using Ramakrishna's language, can be an open channel for divine grace to flow, without which we have no teachers. We cannot fulfill a certain designed function in life. We can operate it like this, that we are individual, that individuality is not randomly put. That individuality is a collection of our own experiences with the divine grace behind that flowers as our personality, as our individuality. It is only when we identify this with this individuality that we have a problem. So, how will we go into any detail on this? We have to follow Patanjali Yoga Sutras. Now I have to mention the other components of what we call the mind, or the internal instrument. So we've mentioned the indriyas, the sense organs, 10 of them. We've mentioned the ego. We should mention the receptive faculty, the large proportion of the conscious mind and unconscious mind too, which is called manasa, classically interpreted as mind itself. Then we have the discerning faculty, where we exercise our individual sense of choice. This is called buddhi, that is intellect. Buddha was a person of enlightened buddhi, intellect. Our aim is to have an enlightened intellect. But we can only have an enlightened intellect once we know that there is behind it a light itself. And so, behind all the components of the mind is pure consciousness that is reflected in the intellect, and that is reflected in the mind as a conscious experience. But when we rally round that conscious experience collectively and assert an identity, this is I. And it is an identity which is a psychophysical identity. It is identified with the body-mind complex. As soon as that happens, then it serves as an obstacle to the realization of what is behind. And the ego, in this sense, is a child of the mother of all our problems, which we can call avidya, ignorance. Let's see what Patanjali has to say. He talks about, and he names them. So he says, avidya, he starts off like that, the pain-bearing obstructions, this is kleshanaha, he puts it, are, and he names them, ignorance, egoism, not ego, egoism, attachment, aversion, and clinging to life. These are the 5 pain-bearing obstructions. These are the 5 pains, the 5-fold tie that binds us down, of which ignorance is the cause, and the other 4 its effects. So when we come across some perceived opposition in our field of experience, conscious field of experience, that opposes us, is unkind to us, that is a company we wouldn't like to seek, that puts us down, that is cruel, and all of these things, whether it's true or not, the fundamental salient characteristic of the pain is our reaction to it. It is our reaction to it. It is how we interpret it, and it is how we react to it. And so, the way we react to it, if we are to identify ourselves as somebody who is hurt when somebody opposes us, somebody who is insulted when somebody hurls insults, somebody who feels a victim when somebody is unkind. All of this is a pain-bearing instruction coming from inside, not from outside. There is this old phrase, you must have heard it as a child, sticks and stones will break my bones, but words will never hurt me. And I was told this as a criticism when I was probably about 10 years old or something, and somebody did something to me, and I reacted, and I remember the school teacher says, hey, what's the problem? No, she did this, and didn't you know, sticks and stones will break my bones, but words will never hurt you. If it's all about words, forget it. So why do words have this effect? They stir up, you imagine now, this chitta, this field, something like a lake with potential waves manifesting 5-fold. And when a pebble is dropped in this field, it creates a whirlpool in the mind. We identify with this whirlpool, and this identification gives us pain. It gives us anxiety. It gives us endless worry. It gives us a regurgitation of events. So it gives us this idea of, chewing the cud of resentments, rehearsing it over and over again. And so during conversation, oh, we won't go, I went grocery shopping today. Yes, But you know what happened to me? You know what they said? We are so obsessed very often with our own world of defense, attack, of this individuality. And this individuality comes out in what we call the Enneagram. And some of you are not familiar with this Enneagram. We hope to do a course here in Dublin at some point. But you see, this Enneagram is designed to deal with the special aspects, the non-standard egos, identified, classified as at least 9 types. And the aim of it is not to say, I am this and you are that, and I'm proud of being this, and you're like that, and I'm fine and you're not. That would be an abuse of the system. The system is designed to understand what is my type of compulsive behavior where I react in a certain way and produce pain in myself and others. And how can I overcome it? How can I look at things in a different way? And what is the solution? The solution is the practical portion of Vedanta that is called yoga. That means taking all the various functional aspects of the mind, namely thinking and feeling. Thinking comes from the buddhi, the intellect. Feeling comes from the manasa. Activity comes from the willing reactionary part of the mind. And we have the capacity to sit down and direct our attention in a conscious way so that we can stimulate an inner discovery, and that is called meditation. These 4 yogas are there. They are there in the Bhagavad Gita, and they are there in the teachings of Sri Ramakrishna, who updates and emphasizes it, and it comes through to all of us through the complete works of Swami Vivekananda that are centered really around these 4 yogas, put into separate literature. Assembly of connected themes coming out as Karma Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, Jnana Yoga, Raja Yoga. In the French, 3 of these are catered for. In the practical, I think the French people will tell me Vedanta Pratique or something like that. You'll tell me anyway. So you see these yogas, 3 of them are contained in there. Jnana Yoga is left out, I think, and it's published separately. In any event, you see, it's now giving you a clue not only of the problem, it's also giving you the cure. The cure is in terms of this yoga. What does yoga mean? Yoga is an attempt to unite and harmonize everything so that we discover the one unity of existence and the highest generalized position. Swami Vivekananda elsewhere points out on his lectures on Vedanta. The highest conclusion must be a generalized conclusion. The closer you get to a unity, the truer it is, and the simpler it is as well. That's the beauty about it. So what is the highest generalized condition? The highest generalized condition is when we discover the authentic self, the Atman, behind everything, we have discovered a unity of existence where no separation exists. It is the sense of separateness that is giving us a difficulty. So, these pain-bearing instructions, ignorance, egoism, attachment, aversion, clinging to life, and they all come in a causal series. What is the cause of egoism? The way we look and interpret life. This is called ignorance. But we don't have to form definitions. Patanjali does it himself. Let's just read the commentary before we describe each one in detail. The 5-fold tie that binds us down, of which ignorance is the cause. The other 4 are its effects. We are all suffering from ignorance. Therefore, what is the antidote? Knowledge. But I'm not talking about encyclopedic knowledge. I'm talking about deep, deep understanding, where we know. In a sense, we become omniscient, where we know the reality which never changes. that is equivalent to a vision of God, and is equivalent to the effect that we discover by this, that is freedom. Freedom from what? Exactly, freedom from pain, and therefore freedom from the pain-bearing obstructions. Now these kleshas, these obstructions, therefore, we have to, once we know they are there, then we can remove them bit by bit. If we go to the root, which is ignorance, and remove that, all the others get removed as well. So, it's the only cause of all our misery. What else can make us miserable? See what we tend to do? We tend to superimpose things. We tend to project, what is psychology calling projection. We say it's the country's fault, it's the politician's fault, it's society's fault, it's the greenhouse gas climate fault, it's my neighbor's fault, it's my boss's fault, it's my job's fault, it's my sister's fault, my brother's fault, my mother's fault. And he put in the domestic environment. We can use any one of these environments and blame others rather than blame ourselves. But really, a very careful, systematic, quiet, and balanced observation will say, actually, it's all me. I can't blame somebody else. It's more accurately, it's succumbing to this ignorance. Ignorance means I misunderstood this world. The nature of the soul, that is the ultimate ego, the ultimate I, the ultimate aham, this ultimate Atman, self. The nature of this is actually eternal bliss. That is why we overcome pain and grief by accessing bliss. That's the opposite. What can make it sorrowful except ignorance, hallucination, delusion? And we're all suffering from it. We are all walking around in a grand sense of hallucination, accepting things which may not really be there, accepting the validity of what is reported in the world of the senses in one frame, namely the conscious world frame, not the dream frame, not the dreamless sleep frame. All pain of the soul is simply delusion. Now, what is ignorance? Ignorance, says Patanjali, is the productive field of all these that follow, whether they are dormant, attenuated, overpowered, or expanded. In other words, whether they are fine and controlled, whether they are repressed, or whether they are expressed. These are the various modes, psychological modes that we use when we recognize whether the field, whether the components of the field are fine and controlled through self-effort, whether they are repressed, which doesn't work, or whether they are expressed. Ignorance is the cause, therefore, of egoism, attachment, aversion, and the last one is clinging to life. Clinging to life. We find it even in a baby, you know. You go like this, make a jerking movement. Even when holding a baby, we assume the baby has no experience of any threat that they may fall, but the baby immediately clutches on. So these impressions, all these impressions exist in different states. They're sometimes dormant, and you often hear the expression, innocent as a baby. Yet, in the baby may be the state of a demon or of a god, which will come out by degrees. Now, in the yogi, these impressions, which we call samskaras, unconscious impressions, they are all left by past actions, whether it's from a past life or whether it's from this life. and they are attenuated, that is, exist in a very fine state. And he can control them and not allow them to become manifest. So this is what is called fine and controlled. And then he cannot allow them to manifest, but overpowered in this case, what does Patanjali mean? It means that sometimes one set of impressions is held down for a while by those that are stronger, but eventually they come out again when that repressing cause is removed. And then the last state is the expanded state, when the samskaras having very helpful, conducive surroundings, attain to a great activity, either as good or as evil. So ignorance, according to Patanjali, is taking the non-eternal, the impure, the painful, and the non-self for the eternal, the pure, the happy, and the Atman, or self, respectively. Let's just analyze that statement, because it's a beautiful summary sutra. It's just a mere thread. So it's taking the non-eternal for the eternal. What is non-eternal? The whole of the spectrum of our experience. Let's confine ourselves to our unit of body and mind. The body is not eternal. We'll all discover as we get older, all the actors on our stage of experience disappearing one by one, and we are the lucky survivor according to us. And then as we grow older, we realize, oh, I didn't make a will. Somebody pointed this out to me. I myself would not even think about it. And so it goes on. But our great mistake is understanding this body will live forever, and it will not. Not only that, but this body is also subject to change. What about the mind? Same thing. The mind is not eternal. So, the impure, what does impure mean? Any state of mind which has the sense of egoism, any state of mind which has not identified the reality of things as they actually are, and the painful and the non-self for the eternal. We can say there are two things, the non-self and the self. That's all. And when we identify the non-self for the self, this is really egoism. All the different sorts of impressions have one source, ignorance. We say it over again. We have first to learn what ignorance is. All of us think, I am the body and not the divine self, the kingdom of heaven within. We are made in the image and likeness of God. Not recognizing this is called ignorance. So, the non-self, the pure, the effulgent, the ever blissful, and that is ignorance. We think of man, that is mankind, and see a person as a body. This is a great delusion. How to get out of it? Cultivate knowledge. Cultivate a different way of looking at things. We can see things as they are in their ephemeral state and learn a penetrating vision to see the self behind it. That is why all our scripture tells us, see the self in all and all beings in the self. Isha Upanishad, Katha Upanishad, Bhagavad Gita, all of them are telling us, see this divine self. And the Bhagavad Gita is personalizing it. He who sees me in all beings, see the Lord in all beings and all beings in the Lord. Repeat it 1,000 million times until you get a glimpse of it. Repeat it 1,000 million times more until you get an understanding of it. Repeating 1,000 times more until you get an experience of it. Then the first effect is egoism. Egoism, what is it? It's the identification of the seer, the truly one that witnesses within, that never changes, with the instrument of seeing. Isn't it funny if we do the same with a car? I am the car. No, you're not the car. You're deluded. I am the shoe. No, I am the coat. No, I am the necklace. No. The fact is, the clue is in the language. These belong to me. I am separate from it. I can drive the car. I can choose not to drive it. But the car is not me and I'm not the car. The subject-object confusion is really ignorance. And the self-identification that comes with it is called egoism. Now, Swami Vivekananda writes a beautiful commentary. His commentaries are based on the ancient commentaries of Patanjali, and he summarized these, condensed them beautifully. He says the seer is really the self with a capital S, the Atman, the pure one, the ever-holy, the infinite, the immortal. This is the self of man. And what are the instruments? Well, he starts off with the mind stuff, chitta, the buddhi, determinative faculty, the manas or the mind, and the indriyas or sense organs. These are the instruments for him to see the external world, and the identification of the self with the instruments is what is called ignorance of egoism. We say, I am the mind, I am thought, I am angry, or I am happy. How can we be angry and how can we hate? We should identify ourselves with the divine self that cannot change. If it is unchangeable, how can it be one moment happy, one moment unhappy? It's formless, infinite, omnipresent. What can change it? It's beyond all law. What can affect it? Nothing in the universe can produce an effect on it. Yet, through ignorance, we identify ourselves with this mind stuff. And we think we feel pleasure or pain. Now, this is why in the midst of the utmost pain, in the Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna suffering the utmost grief, whose symptoms we read in the psychological profiling that Patanjali offers us. Somebody who is grieving, somebody who is shaking, somebody whose breathing is irregular, and so on. All of these symptoms, lack of concentration, all of these belong to Arjuna. And Krishna, what does he do? He dives straight in it and says, wait, this is your problem. Your problem is you think the self can be destroyed. You think that the self is an agent. No, none of these. And then, of course, this egoism leads to attachment. We become attached to the body. We become attached to relatives. We become attached to our house, our car, even labeling a car by a pet name. The car gets into an accident. Oh dear, Betty went to hospital. Betty? Who's Betty? Is Betty your sister? No, it's my car. Oh, okay. Attachment is that which dwells on what? On pleasure. We find pleasure in certain things, and the mind, like a current, flows toward them. And this, following the pleasure center, as it were, is what is called attachment. Beautiful definition, because it tells us about the cause of our attachment. We are never attached where we do not find pleasure. Why would we be? We find pleasure in the body. We find pleasure even in cultural pursuits. We find pleasure in company. We find pleasure in all the objects of life. We find pleasure in the use of a car to the extent that the people pay enormous amount of money for a beautiful flashy car, which also highlights, incidentally, the ignorance of the English people, because in the midst of rain and sleet, they still go with the top of the car down. Anyway, that's another point. So, we are never attached where we don't find pleasure. We find pleasure in very odd things, sometimes, but the principle remains. Wherever we find pleasure, there we are attached. And it's an effort to move toward the pleasure that constructs a strategy in life, because the opposite is our aversion. We're pulling away from something. Aversion is that which dwells on pain, and nobody wants pain. So that which gives us pain, we immediately seek to get away from it and go toward the pleasure. This is the eternal struggle that presents us with the modus operandi. And flowing through its own nature and established even in the learned is what? Clinging to life. This clinging to life you see manifested not only in humans, but in every single animal, even in every species, even in a beetle. It is the secret of this natural selection going on. Upon it, many attempts have been made to build a theory of a future life, because people are so fond of life that they desire a future life also. And of course, it goes without saying that this argument is without much value. And this is one reason why we construct a paradise or a heaven. But the most curious part of it is that in Western countries, and I am reading here Swami Vivekananda's commentary, the idea that this clinging to life indicates a possibility of future life applies only to men, but does not include animals. In India, this clinging to life has been one of the arguments to prove past experience and existence. For instance, if it be true that all our knowledge has come from experience, then it is sure that that which we never experienced, we cannot imagine and we cannot understand. As soon as chickens are hatched, they begin to pick up food. Many times it has been seen where ducks have been hatched by hens, that as soon as they come out of the eggs, where do they go? They fly to the water. And the mother thought they would be drowned. If experience be the only source of knowledge, where did these chickens learn to pick up food? Or where did the ducklings, that the water was their natural element, where did all that instinct come from? We say it's instinct. If you say it's instinct, it doesn't mean anything. It's simply giving a word. It's not giving an explanation. What is this instinct? We have many instincts in ourselves. For instance, most of ladies, he's talking about ladies of his day, 19th century, play the piano and remember when you first learned how carefully you had to put your fingers on the black and the white keys, one after the other. But now, after long years of practice, you can talk with your friends while your fingers play mechanically. And we can apply this and update the examples to driving a car, for example. It has become an instinct. And so with every work we do, by practice it becomes instinct. It becomes automatic. So far as we know, all the cases which we now regard as automatic are degenerated reason. In the language of the yogi, instinct is involved reason. Discrimination becomes involved and gets to be automatic samskaras. Now he goes on with quite a lengthy commentary on it, but we are not dealing with this clinging. We are dealing with the various causes, and the causes are found in these impressions, and this is what these passages are about. The fine samskaras are to be conquered by resolving them into their causal state. The subtle impressions that manifest themselves into gross forms later on. How are these fine samskaras to be controlled? By resolving the effect into its cause. When the chitta, which is an effect, is resolved into its cause, that is egoism, asmita, then only the fine impressions die along with it. Meditation cannot destroy these. So by meditation, says Patanjali, which is the subject of all his sutras, their gross modifications, so these are to be rejected in meditation. It's one of the great means of controlling the rising of these waves. Now, that's a very telling statement. Let's try to simplify it. As soon as a wave arises in the mind, we have the capacity to observe it. Even Swami Vivekananda gives that example of anger rising up, and then we identify with the wave and say, I am angry. But we see it subsides. And every wave has the characteristic of having an origin, having a peak, and having a diminishing aspect and a disappearance. And that comes within a time framework. And the time framework comes in units because the next second is uninvited and unoccupied. We can take advantage of its presence by inserting something of a higher value, inserting nobler values that are more indicative of the truth, repeating such positive attributes as strength and truth and beauty and goodness and love and harmony, and asserting our divine nature. And one method of this is lovingly repeating the name of our God, the name of our Ishtadevata, our personal ideal, our ideal that has the form specifically appealing to us, that we invest our heart's love into. So this whole practice is called yoga. And what is yoga? Well, according to the Bhagavad Gita, according to Krishna, yoga is evenness in mind, regardless of the circumstances. In other words, we have learned not to instinctively react. We have learned to have a calm mind, but it is also skill in action. Because what upsets the mind most is all these activities where we anticipate there's a result and we become anxious of it. And so it's also skill in action. Action by itself doesn't cause any of this bondage or the pain, for it can be the expression of spiritual illumination or God's grace, divine grace. It binds only through the expectation of the effects of our activities, what we poetically can call the fruits of our activities. We plant a seed, we plant a tree, we expect it to yield some fruit. The Lord in the Bhagavad Gita therefore says, the right to work, that's yours only. You only have the right to work. That's a very controversial statement. I bring it up many times because when people say, I have the right to abortion, I have the right to freedom of speech, I have the right to this, I have a right to that, I have a right to my own opinion. Is a democratic society, I have a right. But this is all assuming an identity which is false. It's an identity which is really just the superficial identity, just the mask, just the persona, just the outward covering, just the body-mind complex, just the psychophysical. That's all. It's an instrument. If you understand it to be an instrument, then you have a choice. You can be a divine instrument, or you can stand back and allow divine grace to flow through. What right do we have? The only right we have, therefore, is the right to work. Not to the fruits of our actions, not to the rewards. It's not our vineyard. So let not the fruits of action be your motive. Be not also attached to inaction either. And this whole topic is dealt with in a great deal of detail in the 3rd chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. Actions, they lose their binding nature when they are performed in a number of different ways. Now, the basic requirement is that considerations of I and mine should be transcended. Let's try and deal with Lionel's question. When we do some action, so-called altruistically, is this not also egoistically? Not if we adopt this position of the rewards, the fruits are not mine. I'm doing it not for any sense of self-interest, not for praise, not for blame, doing it anonymously, that's it. So, how can we transcend this I and mine, this sense? This can be done when work is done for the welfare of all, and all is all-inclusive and includes everything and everyone, including you. The characteristic of somebody who has transcended this egoism is that they're working only for the welfare of all. They're doing it even as an offering to the indwelling Lord of all. Offer all your activities and the fruits of activities to the rightful owner. And in either case, there must be equanimity of mind, sustained by proper reasoning, and endowed with the proper wisdom that is the knowledge that is opposed to ignorance, the spiritual aspirant can outgrow in this very life the ego-prompted actions that we can classify as good and evil deeds. Wisdom, in other words, we are, what is spiritual life? Spiritual life is outgrowing this. Wisdom, that is buddhi, is mentioned in 3 consecutive verses in this chapter 3. So from 49 to 51, in chapter 2, from 49 to 51 of the Bhagavad Gita, I'm talking. This can be understood as the knowledge of the self, the divine self, and that arises spontaneously when the mind is purified by dedicated action. We're in the land of Sister Nivedita, the dedicated one. All our action has been dedicated to spiritual life, to the welfare of all beings. Nothing to do with self-interest, self-elevation, or self-salvation. So karma yoga, that is the true meaning. We are obliged to work, and so we do it. We are more and more inclined toward that, since this is supposed to be the Kali Yuga that began 18th February in 3102 before this current era. Self-realization is attained when the intellect, freed from all complexity, perplexity, misunderstandings, puzzlement, confusion, stands steady in the glory of the divine self. So, how we overcome this ego is there, this egoism. And it is a process. Don't expect to get out of it in one go. It's not going to happen. Now, I wasn't entirely sure, I have to say, with Lionel's question, so I have to go back to him and ask, did you find an answer in the overall answer to things?
Yes. Here I can see it can be read here egolos. As the dissolution process concludes, a person feels a complete loss of subjective identity.
Yes.
For that matter, there will be no self able to feel this in the traditional sense. Instead, there will be a sense of unity with the expansive fabric of reality. Oh.
Yes, that's exactly it.
Yeah.
So there's no objective sense of ego, nor is there a subject-object divide. There is a sense of a unity of existence. And of course, that becomes indescribable, because if you take space away, what will you describe? If you take time away, what will you describe? If you merge subject and object so that neither of these exist, how will you describe it? That is why in Buddhism they use the term of shunya, misunderstood. It is not a question of emptiness. Actually, it's a question of fullness, since that divine self's nature is pure bliss. And that's what we're looking for. If you see, all these are not speculative statements. If you want to find out, if you have a questioning mind and you want to find out such simple things, why do we have a psychological need for fun and humor and joy? It's because our nature is blissful. In other words, we are struggling to get back to our original pristine nature, and we're unaware of that. We divert the mind into the interests and think that the joy will be in the pleasures. But straight away, and I said this last night, the Katha Upanishad will tell us very, very quickly, there are 2 different ways of behaving. You can go toward the pleasurable or the preferable, and this is why the fundamental spiritual discipline is discernment, what we call viveka. Now, the classical way of viveka is this discernment to find out and interpret everything in terms of a classification of what is real and permanent, what is unreal and ephemeral. But you see, this kind of discernment is held by every system in its own way. Bhakti yoga, for example, love of God, the easiest way, non-demanding love. We make a distinction between the things which are lovable and the things which really are damaging and painful. A love is still centered around love. A love for the things which are lasting, and versus a love for things which are transitory. And we put that in a personalized way. There's nobody who can exceed my divine Lord, for example. Let's see the emotion of the gopis. Let us see the emotion of the mystics, even the Christian mystics. Let us see Catherine of Siena and the emotional involvement with her divine love. And so it goes on, you see. So whichever way you look at it, discernment is necessary. That automatically leads to detachment. Don't forget, attachment is linked with pleasure. And so detachment is not linked to aversion. Detachment is observing it in a calm and equanimous way, an equal-minded way, which says, okay, wait. These things, aversion and attachment, are giving me pain. These are pain-bearing obstacles. Where should I go with this? If I have to be attached, let me be attached to the most beloved one of the universe, beyond compare. Nobody is better. Nobody is more perfect than this. That is why you see Christian nuns adopt this epithet, bride of Christ. They marry Jesus the Christ. They are married to him. They take on vows of marriage. What a beautiful idea. I once heard well, I didn't hear firsthand, but I heard of a court case in the 1960s, maybe the 70s, and some traditional Christians were arguing against the followers of Krishna, saying, but Krishna had so many hundreds and hundreds of wives. I think at least 1,600 and more wives. How can we, this is very crude. How can we allow such a religion in our area? And the defendant said, yes, but how many nuns do you have? And they said, I don't know, approximately so on, let's say 2,000 or so. And they're all brides of Christ. Imagine. So you see, this was a funny example of two things. Firstly, how we can be biased in our favorite outlook, and secondly, it highlights a way, an avenue where we can take attachment and divert it so that it becomes canalized in something that is ultimately revealing, because it opens up purity, goodness, truth, the highest perfection. And that is the technique. The technique is to saturate the mind with knowledge, purity, goodness, clarification, and all the characteristic of all of that cultivating soil that we are tilling over, is all because it is non-egocentric. There's no egoism in it. It is all selfless. Characteristic of holiness is selflessness in every sense. And it's very subtle, very subtle. It requires us to really be honest and identify all our thoughts, all our activities, and question, are these in any way to protect my self-image or protect my individual stance, where I'm assuming a body-mind complex, an individuality like that. And everything that is supporting that misplaced, Swami Vivekananda calls it delusion, that delusional aspect naturally will be pain-bearing for us and does not fall into the category of saving grace which we call sattva. So, all right. And I don't see Anusha's name there, but she asked the question, so maybe she'll listen to the recording or something and find some solace or some satisfaction or some direction, more importantly, in what we have discussed this evening. Well, we'll leave it like that. So, Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. Before I leave, I just remind you that there is the Art of Meditation on the 6th and 7th of April. So at some point there's a cutoff date. And so please register by sending an email or a text or something of that nature.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Thank
Thank
you,
you, Swamiji.
Swamiji.